Buenos dias. Good morning. My name is Norma Chavez-Peterson. I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial counties. Oh, this is first. Want to welcome you again this morning, and I actually am really excited because I have the honor and the privilege to introduce to you one of my favorite sheroes from San Diego that I know not just from her days at teaching at my alma mater at San Diego State, but from her years and years of history of working in our communities. Before I introduce our keynote this morning, Dr. Shirley Weber, I want to tell you a little bit about not just her own amazing, courageous leadership and how she's constantly on the battlefield since she's been elected to the state assembly around all of the issues, many of the issues that are totally aligned with the ACLU, but a little bit about our own journey as ACLU fighting to end racial profiling and pushing to ensure that we hold law enforcement accountable, right? This has been years and years of work and struggle. And I remember, how many of you remember Abdi yesterday talking about in 1999, under the leadership of our then team member, staffer, Michelle Alexander, ACLU helped to pass a racial profiling bill that would collect data around police stops. And it was vetoed. And that was years and years of struggle to get it to the finish line and then to have it vetoed, right? How many of you remember that, right? How many of you went to the police practices workshop yesterday with Peter Biebring and Kellen and Chauncey, right? And we heard story after story from people all over the state of California, from Fresno to San Diego to LA, talking about the stories of either themselves being racially profiled or feeling targeted or over-policed, or many times mothers having to tell their children and train their children how they should behave when they were to encounter law enforcement. How many of you went to that workshop? And I know we brought a large contingent from San Diego, especially young people from all over, from Lincoln High School, Sweetwater High School, Mac Charter School, Orange Glen High School. And on the bus, we were having this conversation. And so I'd like to ask you all in the room, how many of you have been victims of racial profiling in your own community? Stand up. I want to see the room. Right? I mean, this is an issue that doesn't just happen. Thank you. Sit down. How many of you have family members who have been racially profiled? Right? We stand back up. This is something that is affecting communities across California. This is something that if you live in a predominantly low-income community of color, you're gonna face this reality every single day. In San Diego, about a year ago, ACLU partnered with NAACP and other community organizations because our then police chief had decided that there was really no need to collect racial profiling data because he wasn't hearing from the community. There's no racial profiling in San Diego. And after a really great investigative report that iNewsSource did, which is the public news station, we entered into this battle with the San Diego City Council and the police chief to get them to once again do what their own policy required and actually collect racial profiling data. A couple months ago, they just released the first year's report of this data. And I'm sure you're not going to be surprised because I'm talking to the choir. But in San Diego, California, if you're an African-American male, you're 3 times more likely to get pulled over, searched, right, for no reason other than because of the way you look. If you're Latino, you're 2 times more likely to get pulled over, searched, and not arrested. Actually, if you're African American, Latino, you're 5 times less likely to actually be found with a crime, right? Charged with a crime. They just search you, so it's the stop and frisk stories that we've heard from New York and the driving by while brown stories that we've heard from Arizona, and it's happening here in our own communities. Well, so after we got this data released, we were actually at a meeting, Kellen and I, with the police chief, and she was actually saying, well, you know, this data's not conclusive. It's inconclusive because San Diego's America's finest city, and we have a lot of visitors here. You know, they come to see the Padres, see the Chargers. We're a binational community, so there's so many people that come across the border, so we don't really know if this data really shows that San Diegans are being racially profiled. I mean, can you believe that? So I was so excited to hear from our Sacramento office from Chauncey that our own assembly member from San Diego was going to be taking the lead on introducing a racial profiling bill that I know you all have studied and you all are going to be addressing with your representatives today. And that's AB 953. Because you do have the local police departments, some of them resisting and some of them that do collect data still don't think that it's conclusive enough. So we need the state to step in and set this requirement and the guidelines and the policy at a state level to make sure that we end racial profiling, not just in San Diego, but in LA, in Fresno, in Oakland, right? So her leadership, Dr. Weber's leadership, I say is leadership that is courageous because these are not easy issues, right? I mean, we're all here with ACLU. We're constantly fighting the good fight and going many times up against the grain, right? But you better believe that the law enforcement lobby, the corrections officer, the sheriff's association, all of law enforcement, and many times elected officials that we see as progressive, right, are too afraid to take on the tough issues of police accountability and transparency. They're afraid. I mean, I won't talk about the conversation we were having earlier, but many times the electeds that are totally aligned with us on LGBT equality, on immigrant rights, are too afraid to take on law enforcement. But that is not Dr. Shirley Weber. That is not Dr. Shirley Weber, okay? She is a woman that not only lives what she believes in every day, but she is a fighter. She fights for what is right, and she fights to go against the grain. Right? And yeah, let's give it up to her. Right? We heard yesterday from Patrice, what did we hear? We have a duty to fight for freedom, right? We have a duty to fight for freedom. And Dr. Shirley Weber does that every single day. So I want to get a chance to introduce her in a second, but before that I want to remind you that 2 of the 4 bills that we will be lobbying on this afternoon are led by this amazing woman, right? And I also wanted to mention that half of you, this is the first time that you come to Sacramento, right? Yesterday when Abdi asked, half of you, this is your first time. Well, this is just the beginning, okay? Because the work begins today when you go meet with your representatives and you talk to them about these important bills and these important solutions and these important issues, but it doesn't end here because guess what happens? This is going to be a long fight, and we're going to have to go back to our local communities. We're going to have to organize. We're going to have to go talk to our representatives in our own local office across the state because guess what? It's not going to be easy for Dr. Weber, and she is not alone. There's 250 people in this room that are going to keep fighting with her once we get back home to our own communities to make sure that these bills to end racial profiling, to make sure that law enforcement is accountable and transparent, and that we know every single time that not only they kill somebody, but that they use excessive use of force, right? So the fight begins today when you go to the state capitol, but we will have to continue to engage in our local communities with ACLU, with other coalition partners, to take these bills to victory. So with that, I want to introduce to you Dr. Weber, who I'll tell you a little bit about herself. She's an amazing speaker. Many of you have heard her before because she speaks from her heart and her passion. She was first elected to the State Assembly in 2012. She represents San Diego. She's the first African American to represent San Diego in the State Assembly. And that was way long overdue, okay? And we need to keep her there, and then she's gonna move to the Senate and beyond. She's lived in the 79th District for more than 30 years. Her parents had a bright vision for her in her future. She attended UCLA, and by the age of 26, she had earned her BA, her MA, and her PhD from UCLA. She is a proud Bruin. She's a college professor. That's when I first met her at San Diego State. She was chair of Africana Studies at San Diego State. Most recently, actually before being elected to the State Assembly, she had been elected to the San Diego City School Board, San Diego Unified School District, where she fought around issues again of equity and ending the achievement gap for Black and brown students. So again, she's been a fighter for a long time. All of her life, she's been fighting for equality, for justice, and to end discrimination. So with that, I want to have you join me in welcoming Dr. Shirley Weber.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, you got to have more energy than that if you're going to fight the monsters across the street. Let me say, first of all, that I'm really pleased to be here with you this morning, and I'm really happy that you're here. You being in the Capitol is very, very important, and never underestimate the power that you have to influence the decisions that we make here in Sacramento. I'm always so pleased when I get the support of the ACLU because I've spent a significant portion of my life involved with the ACLU at the San Diego chapter that's there. You know, for many years, my husband was president of NAACP. Was instrumental in getting the district elections instituted in what was Prop E at the time, and getting that passed in San Diego to bring some empowerment to communities. He served on the board of the ACLU for many, many years prior to his death. In addition to that, because we had small children at the time, I could not serve on the board, but I served on every year on the committee that was nominating individuals to be on the board. So I've had a long, extensive, my family and I have had a long, extensive relationship with the ACLU. Probably my motivation always comes out of the fact that my parents were sharecroppers in Hope, Arkansas. And my father left Hope, Arkansas in August of 1951 because they wanted to kill him, because he refused to submit to the sharecropping system. He refused to allow himself to be cheated. He refused to say yes, sir, no, sir, to people who called him boy. And he, as a result, was known, as they call in those days, one of those crazy niggas, you know. And but they were going to kill him and probably threaten his entire family. And so he had to leave late at night, as they came looking for him, to come to California where my grandmother lived, and eventually the rest of us came afterwards. But my father had a passion about justice and equality and the opportunity to vote, and he instilled that passion in me. And I've been very blessed and fortunate to have a strong family of support in terms of my brothers and sisters. There are 8 of us. To have a strong support from them, and a strong passion and a strong spiritual base that gives me the understanding that I don't fear those who can destroy my body, only the person who can take my body and soul. And so as a result of that, you stand for what's right, you stand for what is just, you don't count the cost to yourself personally, because somehow or another it always works out in the end. I did that for 40 years at San Diego State University, always trying to be a voice of reason and justice and equality and fighting for janitors and fighting for students and fighting for everybody that's there. My son says, you just fight, 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 which I do, and I never was a cheerleader. But it's just a part of my, I think, a part of my DNA. Because life has been so good to me. And even in the midst of poverty, living in the projects of Los Angeles, I still had a great family with a great vision. I was brought to a great state called California that had an absolutely fabulous higher ed system that allowed me to get 3 degrees and only owe $1,250 in the end. That was a good days. That's when California had views and visions for its young people. And I still fight for our universities of California and our CSUs to be reasonable and accessible to all students because it made a difference in my life. It afforded me the kind of education, the opportunity to go to San Diego State as a professor at the age of 23, to spend a 40-year career at the university as a tenured faculty that gave me a platform and a voice that nobody could take away. And so I just feel that it's my responsibility. When I was preparing and I had retired from the university and was preparing to live the good life, was when I got a call from Tony Atkins about running for the state assembly. And I consistently said, no, 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 life is good, why should I screw it up? And, but as I tell people, it was one day when I went to a meeting in the dean's office with all the other chairs, and I realized that California had been good to me, life had been great, and I had a responsibility. And somehow or another, I never backed away from my responsibilities. And my responsibility was to try to come to Sacramento and make a difference. And that's why I'm here. I'm not here to run for higher office. I'm not here to run for Congress or any of those things. And I never have that as a vision because so often people spend their time looking ahead so much that they can't do what they're doing while they're standing in a certain spot. And so as a result, that's my passion, that's my drive. So I'm really glad to be here this morning to be a part of your opening, and I can't emphasize to you enough just how critical your role is here in Sacramento. You know, you sometimes think that I'm just one person, I'm just one individual, and it's not really that important. But let me tell you, it is very important what you do. To meet with members and to talk about specific issues and bills that you want is very important. To go back to your home and to tell your friends and your colleagues and your neighbors that they need to rally, that they need to write letters, that they need to make phone calls, because those things count. I mean, when something comes up, staff will tell you, we got 350 calls about whatever. I mean, that's very important. And you need to understand that the opposition against you is very organized, very organized. And in this critical period, we need to be organized as well, because I think our voice is stronger. I think our voice is really the majority, and surely our voice is the American voice, the voice of opportunity. I thank the ACLU for a lot of things. You know, I've not always agreed with you in my earlier days, and you've kind of helped shape my view about equal opportunity, access, and responsibility. You know, I can remember when you guys protest, ACLU was in favor of allowing the KKK to express itself and have rallies and marches. And you know, in my younger days, I'm thinking, what the heck is that? You know, I thought they were our friends. What are they doing? You know, but then I had to realize that, you know, that's what this democracy is about. You know, when you travel around, it's not always about what you believe in personally. It's about civil liberties and the rights of individuals to actually express themselves. And you may agree with them sometimes, you may not, but you always agree with their right to do it. And as a result, I use that often when I go into places, when I go into churches, and they have problems with LGBT individuals and things like that. I don't talk about their religious values and what they think and try to change those. I talk about the American values and who we are as an American, and how as an American this nation is made up with a whole lot of folks that people we agree with and we disagree with, but they have a right of existence, and they have a right of happiness, and they have the right in this country. Why? Because we are America, because we have a democracy, and that's what we believe in. And so you have taught me that. You have taught me that. And that becomes a driving force. And interestingly enough, it has oftentimes softened, it sometimes changes, but it surely has softened some of the ministers in my community in their opposition against the LGBT community. I took Speaker Atkins with me to one of our most holiest holy churches, St. Stephen's, and she was greatly welcomed. And I think our discussions had somewhat softened the minister. Some of his elders were upset, but nonetheless, she was there on the podium with me speaking to the congregation. And that's important. That's important to open up those avenues of conversation in that community so they understand what it really is to be an American, that you can be a Christian with different values and still be an American and fight for others' rights that are there. Clearly, I thank you so much for your support of my bills. Particularly, I was excited when you became a co-author of 619 and 963. So often when we're doing these bills that are challenging bills that you'll be looking at, I often ask my staff, who's going to fight with us? Who's on our team? Who's with us? And when they say the ACLU, I say, whew, okay, that's cool. We can deal with it. You know, we can fight this battle because I know you have folks who are passionate. I know you have the drive. I know you have the interest that's there. And we need that participation. We need that advocacy. We need you on our team. You know, over the past few months, as you know, and it hits home to many of us. There have been a tremendous number of deaths of individuals, of unarmed persons in our community by the hands of law enforcement. And while this has become a national thing, beginning with Rodney King and his video that was shown of him being beaten down, and nobody stopping the beating. And then, unfortunately, the declaring of those men being innocent later on. But you know, we've come through. We're in an era now where people are becoming aware of it, and it's interesting to me because if you live in the African American community, you're not shocked by any of it. It doesn't shock you that these things happen. It doesn't shock you that they're there, because probably all of us know someone who's been the victim of it. We know someone who's probably been killed as a result of it. And so it's unfortunate that for us it's not a surprise attack that we're seeing it now. But it is reassuring now that we at least have some evidence, and we have some friends and some colleagues who are not African American, who are not Latino, who see what is happening. And it somehow or another creates a voice and an opportunity to do some good things. When we look at our AB 619 bill, as most of you know, this is concerning the whole issue that we have to deal with in terms of looking at the conversation of transparency and accountability, and making sure that there is some effort to begin to collect data and information concerning what is happening with violence against others. And you know, it's interesting that when you talk to different persons, they don't, you know, they don't, some want the data, others don't. They don't want to be confronted with it. They don't want the reality of looking at it. Or they think we're being too prescriptive in asking for this information. Or it's going to cost us an awful lot of money in order to collect data and to decide what we're going to do with that data. And it's really interesting that when I'm talking to persons about it, what always comes up is the dollar bill. How much is this going to cost to collect data? How much is this going to cost to have information about what we're doing and how we're doing it? Well, most of us know that you don't change policy, you don't do things without data, without knowing what you're changing, why you're changing it. And it's not that we haven't had data in the past. We want to drive the data, not only to collect it, to get it, but to drive it to make change. You know, I tell people, I remember because of my husband being such an activist with the California Black Lawyers Association, with cable, I remember once getting data concerning prosecution of African Americans, and it was in the LA Times, and it basically said that when an African American is arrested for a crime, and there's a choice between being a felony or misdemeanor, he's generally given the felony, much more than whites are given the felony. And then when he's convicted, he's given the maximum sentence for that conviction, where others are given the minimal sentence. And this goes on in this article, and they ask the judge, and he says, that's probably true. And that was it. You know, it's just like, that's the way we live. You know, that's, as the kids say, that's the way we roll, you know. And so it was interesting that nothing happened after that. There was discussion, but no policy, no efforts to bring change, nothing to to talk about who we appoint as judges, nothing to say we need to look at the data and begin to re-examine our behavior on a regular basis. But this was just one study done, and nobody denied it. The district attorneys didn't deny the fact that they prosecute African Americans at a higher level for felonies where they have an option to do misdemeanors. The judges didn't deny the fact that they give longer sentences or the maximum sentence for the same offense that someone else has committed. I mean, it's just like accepting the racial bias that's there, the racism, and I hate the word racial bias, accepting the racism that's there. People don't like that word. They like racial bias as if it makes it different. I don't understand that either. But, you know, I was in a meeting the other day, and they kept talking about racial bias, racial bias, racial bias, and I said, is that racism? I mean, I just need to know, because if it's different, I need to know, you know, but if it's the same, then just call it what it is, because then I know how to respond to it. But racial bias kind of makes it, you know, soft and sweet, you know, I mean, I don't know, whatever. But these are the battles that we fight consistently about. Now we're almost at the point, I think, even in the law enforcement, where we accept racial bias as just a part of being a police officer, as a part of life, as if it's something that can't change. It's like it's in the DNA, because they all admit to racial bias. And so I'm saying, okay, you admitted to it, so what you gonna do about it? I mean, well, we'll have a couple classes and that kind of thing, but there's no effort to talk about how you deal with racial bias so that it no longer becomes a part of the fabric and the culture of the police department. So surely we're talking about trying to make sure that those who are collecting the data, that the data can be collected, can be used in an effective way that's there. Our Bill 953 talks about racial profiling, and most of us have, you know, once again, this whole issue of racial bias and being in racial profiling and the multiple definitions that are there. The interesting thing for us that at some point our LAO did a report and basically said that our racial profiling laws in California are so general that they are ineffective, that you can't apply them at all, that they're so broad, so general, that they're not helpful to anybody. And so this bill attempts to use the federal standards for that, so that we can have at least a statute and a discussion that allows individuals to utilize it for the purposes of eliminating racial bias in our police office. You know, that's critical. That's extremely important, because we admit it exists. We admit that there's racial bias, profiling that occurs, and yet we feel that we don't have the opportunity or the tools to really clearly deal with it and to effectively change it. So it'll be important for us to look at these bills and realize that it's there. There'll be tremendous opposition, obvious, from district attorney, from whoever else. I'm not sure all of the opposition, but fortunately we have a lot of good friends who are on our side, who are pushing these issues and these critical issues that are there. Most of you know I'm also authoring AB 66. And it's really funny, when I came to the Assembly, I had no idea I do so much in the area of civil liberties. I had no idea. I didn't know I was hiring Marcus, but I had no idea that I was going to do this much in terms of that. You know, I'm an educator, so I figure I do mostly education, and we do a lot of education, and I fight a lot of battles for kids against CTA. You need to know that too. I mean, I feel like this year there's a big target on my chest, which is okay, because there's been big targets on other people's chests who stood up for me. And maybe that big target is like Superwoman or something. But, you know, I'm getting it from every direction. We have at least 4 bills where everybody's mad, and that's a good thing. You know, that's a good thing. I remember when I was elected to the school board, someone gave a speech at another school board and said, "I have come to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable." And I guess that's a good thing, because given the situations we face for children and families in California, if you're comfortable with a failing school system, if you're comfortable with inadequate education, if you're comfortable with 93% of our students going to trade schools who can't do math and science and they have high school diplomas, if you're comfortable with that, then you need to be afflicted. You need to be afflicted. And so we're fighting the good fight against sometimes chairs of committees, sometimes members of committees and what have you. And I'm just calling people out. That's my thing. I'm calling people out because, you know, the reality is we're dealing with our bill dealing with body cameras and AB 66 basically is a simple bill that says, you know, you've got to have some uniform state policies concerning body cameras. You know, my thing is that, you know, I'm not a big body camera fan, but It's done some good. That's number one. But in addition to that, if we're going to have body cameras, they cannot be working against the people that they were designed to help. I mean, they were not designed to help the police department. They were designed to help the communities and to bring justice for the communities. And if it turns out to be a tool that's only going to be turned on the community, and that's my concern. You know, we get these things and all of a sudden we discover that we're being prosecuted more and these are things that are happening to us, you know, then we need some policy to prevent that from happening. And so the statewide policy is to do that. And, you know, they've got some concerns about it. They want to write all their reports, looking at the video and all that kind of stuff. And we're saying, no, that doesn't happen that way. This is how it happens. And so they're upset about it. You know, they're mad. You know, you know, they tell me that San Diego loves its police. Well, this is a statewide policy. And all of us love the police when we're in trouble. We do call them. I mean, we have nobody else to call. We pay them to come when we're in trouble. That's standard, is according to the job. But you know, but we're still fighting for this because this is critical. This is important as we see these young men being killed on the streets or individuals being shot in the back and people saying they did something and they really didn't. And all this stuff is just coming out. It's just like, and you would think that in an atmosphere of telephone cameras that they would be much more vigilant, more conscious of what they do and tone down some of it and look like they haven't done it. It's just like a part of the whatever happens is business. Instead of seeing a decrease, you're seeing more of this stuff happening. And it's kind of scary to a certain extent because you would assume that exposure creates a different kind of behavior, and it hasn't. And so I think we as a state have to set some policies that are very, very clear about what we want to do with body cameras. You know, my governor, I'm not sure if he's on page with us because, you know, they talk about it, everybody wants individual policies. But my thing is, I live in my district has 5 or 6 different police departments. If every police department writes its own policy, then I am totally confused as I move from San Diego to La Mesa, to El Cajon, to Chula Vista, to National City, and I'm seeing all these different police departments, and everybody has a different policy. I don't know whether they have to inform me that they turn the camera on or they don't have to inform me. I don't know whether I have 120 days or whether I have 90 days. I mean, you know, there has to be a statewide policy that gives us uniform standards because this is a very mobile state, and we need to know exactly where we're going and who we're interacting with, and it's important enough to have a statewide policy to do that. Let me just simply say that as I close down my comments today, and I'll open up for a few questions. I know you've got a very busy agenda, but let me just say that, you know, what the work you do and the work we're trying to do is very, very important to a whole lot of individuals. You know, and someone asked me recently in one of the articles that was there, and I had a call from a young man last night, a kid in the community who saw the stuff on body cameras and something else on television. And, you know, I don't know what the storyline was, but he called and he told my son, hey, tell your mom we all out here talking about her and we excited, you know. And so it was kind of interesting that he said that. And I've known this kid since he was 2 or 3 years old. But, you know, the issue was, and I expressed this to the speaker, you know, when this stuff started happening and a lot of things took place last fall and all the students protesting in the streets and various other kinds of things that took place, my son came to me and said, Mom, you know, we're doing the best we can with raising the issues on social media and stuff and so forth and so on. He said, but you know, you're in the state assembly. You're chair of the state budget. You got juice. He said, and we're counting on you and Miss Atkins, since she's a speaker, and we know her, to do something about this. And I say this to my colleagues because many of those, some who look like me, some are members of the Latino caucus, some others, are wibble-wobble on a lot of this stuff. They're wibble-wobble. You need to understand that. They're wibble-wobble. You know, they come to me, I'm not sure. Well, I understand the nature of campaigns. I understand the nature of fundraising. Most of them are in safe districts, so it really almost doesn't matter what they do. They'll be reelected. But you got to have courage. And I don't know what their vision is to run for Congress or whether it's to run for the Senate or to become governor. I don't know what these people's dreams are. But I do know that all of us have a responsibility to stand up and to be counted because somebody stood up for us. And that's what I keep telling folks in my mind, that I am not Shirley Weber because I'm so black, brilliant, and beautiful. And I'm all of those things. But, you know, I am who I am because somebody who stood up for some poor little, who didn't even know me, stood up and fought the issues that were important. You know, I look at Selma and I see those folks who put their bodies and their lives on the line for us to vote. You know, they didn't know me, they didn't know half the people they were fighting for, but they did it, you know. And I tell my colleagues and others, I said, and I'm not even asking you to do that. I'm not asking you to fight and be beat by police officers and shot without anybody having a record of it. I'm just asking you to stand up and fight for the people that you came here to represent, that you know what they struggle with, that your families and others struggle with. I just ask for you to stand up and be counted and to be the change agent in California that we so seriously need. So I thank you for your support. We'll continue the battle. Like I tell people, I don't have a whole lot of aspirations for higher office. That's not my agenda. I just want to make sure the spot that I stand in at this moment is a significant spot and it makes a difference. And if it does that, then I am pleased. Thank you so much.